Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to today's forum for school librarians facilitating the success of English learners. So we still have some people coming in, but we'll move right along. So as you know, the purpose of this project is to do two things. Goal one, we want to create a toolkit with resources and research-based practices that school librarians can use for working with English learners. And goal two, we want to develop a white paper with an action plan for future school librarian training and serving English learners and school libraries. So you all are here because you have indicated that you have an understanding of some aspect of assisting English learners. With that said, we're going to rely heavily on your expertise. We're an interdisciplinary group. There's people that focus on educational technology, linguists, school teachers, school librarians, school administrators, just a multiple amount of English learner stakeholders in the room today. And again, thank you for being here. So I wanted to remind you all to do just a few things. If you haven't done so already, I think it's important for us to know who we're talking to. And so if you could take a moment, just go ahead and put in the chat and tell us your name and where you're from, like what city are you in right now or state. And also, I hope that you all either got a chance to join the Flipgrid or the Jamboard. I put the link for the Jamboard in the chat, and I'm going to ask IJ to retrieve it and paste it back in for the people that just came in. And that's an important thing to have because it's part of our data collection. We'll ask questions here and there. We would have been face-to-face, but this is how we're improvising for this situation. So the same questions are on the Flipgrid or the Jamboard, and I made videos to help you understand how to use both. We will be using a Jamboard later on this afternoon. So it's great to go to that Jamboard and practice as well. And there's a video there about how to use a Jamboard if you haven't used it before. So also, I wanted to provide you with the link to our agenda just in case you missed it. Please save that link for later. So I'll talk about the agenda again in just a moment, and let me check to see if our presenter is here. He hasn't made it to the room yet, so I'll keep going. So here are some guidelines that I ask everybody to use. First, please rename yourself if you have an odd name up there that's not yours, like Happy Puppy 1. I don't think there's anybody in the room like that now, but if you should have that type of name, please change it. If you can, please turn on your camera. I understand if you turn it off while the presenter is speaking. Please mute your microphone unless you're speaking actively, but I hope that we'll all have a chance to speak today. Please participate. You just introduced yourself in the chat, I hope. Thank you so much for doing that. And there are some really cute reactions here in Zoom. If you go to the bottom of the screen, you can find those reactions and use the emojis depending on how you're feeling. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Also, IJ is helping us in the background, so you can always send her a private message about any issues that you have. There may be some polls or just some questions to answer in the chat. Please do that. And we will have breakout rooms. So for each breakout room, I'm going to ask someone to be willing to record locally to their computer and share the recording with me later. But there will be breakout rooms for the second half. Okay, some principles of engagement. We come from a wide variety of backgrounds, right? So, and going into this whole exploration of how we work with English learners, I'm going to ask you all to do a couple of things. One, since we're speaking from multiple backgrounds, please suspend judgment so that we can come together and solve this problem. Suspend denial, guilt or guilt tripping, assumptions or distractions during this process, interruptions with the conversations, or even side conversations. And even though I'm going to introduce our speakers accordingly, I ask that we also suspend titles. Just in case you're one of my students, or I don't know, maybe you just end the titles, but I'm Daniela. All right, and let's embrace awareness towards understanding. And sometimes when we get that understanding, it becomes uncomfortable just a little bit, but that's okay. Do some self-analysis if it will help you to understand how school librarians can help English learners. There might be some opportunities for cognitive dissonance. Let's create a safe space so that, you know, we don't want to gaslight anybody like that was really a stupid comment. We want an opportunity to learn about English learners, share airtime. If you spoke twice in a row and someone else wants to speak, please let them, but otherwise go for it. We need to learn everything that we can. And let's stay here in this moment so that we can learn from each other again. So I put up parts of the agenda, which are also at that link that I shared. So 9:30 to 9:45, I'm running my mouth and doing the form introduction. And then at 9:45, Dr. Krashen is supposed to be here with us, and he's going to present. Let me check the participants. Also, I want to say, I am like in this moment, if you get kicked off and I'm talking, I will try to keep my email open, but if you get kicked off and I'm talking, I might not see your emails right away. So I'm going to apologize in advance for that. But please do also email IJ as well. Poor IJ, I'm volunteering her for everything. She's like my rock for this process. Thank you, IJ. So Dr. Krashen is here and he'll start talking shortly. After Dr. Krashen talks, there might be some time for questions, but we will go on a break. And then we're going to have breakout sessions. So you can go immediately to the breakout sessions if you like. They're listed here with the speakers. And this is why it's important to have a copy of the agenda. You may move between sessions if you like. So maybe you went to the 11 o'clock session for one person, but then you want to hear what the 11:30 person has to say in another room. That's fine. So these are all different Zoom rooms here. And unfortunately, I didn't have an even number of presenters. So Jennifer Sawyer, she's going to have a pre-recorded presentation and be in her room for a little while to answer any questions that you have. Please do feel free to have dialogue. Also, note that some of the sessions are a little bit shorter. So if they end early, if there's no dialogue, that'll just give you some time to move to another session if you feel like it. After the sessions, you can move immediately to lunch. And then I ask that you reuse your registration link and come back to this room by 1 p.m. And then we're going to have a Jamboard exercise. Please don't get lost. Please come back to us, please. And so that's the way our day is going to go. And then Dr. Denise Atkins, she's going to present for us as well. Okay. So without further talking from me, you must be really interested in hearing from this presenter who is absolutely amazing. How many of us know somebody with their own Wikipedia page, right? So Dr. Stephen Krashen is active in research in language acquisition, bilingual education, literacy, and heritage language development. His sister got him his first library card 72 years ago from the Albany Park Public Library in Chicago when he was 9. Many of his books and papers are available for free download at www.sdkrashen.com. He invites you to follow him on Twitter, and his goal is to have more followers than Justin Bieber. So in the meantime, I do have a question for you, Dr. Krashen. I have enabled you to share. Do you want me to share your document from your screen? And I can also upload it in the chat for everyone. Or would you like to share your document yourself? Okay, so Dr. Krashen says, I really will be here after I have a little more coffee.
No, I'm okay now. I'm okay. I unmuted myself and I want everyone to see the handout. And you can share it with everyone except Donald Trump. How's that?
Okay, so you want me to share it from my screen? Okay, I can do that for you. I'm just downloading it really quick.
Are we ready? Can I start talking?
Yes, you can start talking.
All right.
I'm going to share the screen and I'll upload this for you, everyone.
Okay, good.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. You have no idea how wonderful this is. Everything comes together today. And I'll tell you why while we're setting this up. My original work was in language acquisition. Then I added to that literacy. Then another decade, I discovered how incredible reading is, especially pleasure reading. And in the last decade or so, thanks mostly to Keith Curry Lance, who's really our best friend, the importance of libraries, which is why I like to start out with my adventures with the Chicago Public Library. I told my sister that last night. I said, I'm going to tell everybody what happened when you got me my first library card and it changed the world. So everything is coming together. Okay, the screen is up, the handout is up, and I can start talking. I'm going to begin with a little story which really tells everything. If I tell you the story, you won't need anything else, but I'll repeat everything all over again in boring academic language, which is what I'm supposed to do. Starts out with my adventure at the supermarket. I want to tell you what I've been doing during the pandemic at home. I tell people I'm home alone with my girlfriend, which is true. We've only been married for 55 years, and we're doing very, very well at home. And one of the things, we don't go out unless we absolutely have to. I've been going shopping every Friday morning, early in the morning, because at the local supermarket, there's a special time where old people can come. That's me. You have to be at least 65. And the first time I did this, I went and got my groceries, got in line, and the man taking my groceries and kept putting them through the cash register, I saw his name was Fidel. And I had heard him speak Spanish. Now, I'm not very good in Spanish. It's like language number 4 or 5, but I'm so interested in languages all the time. So I spoke to him in Spanish. He answered me in English, which is what he is instructed to do. But I was ready. I said to him, Fidel, tú puedes ayudarme. You can help me. I said, mi meta es hablar español como ustedes. My goal is to speak Spanish the way you do. I said, por favor, hablamos español. Let's speak Spanish. He really liked that. It's like I put him on my team. And this began a 1.5 year relationship. I went there the other day, but he wasn't there, too bad. Every Friday, though, for a 1.5 years, I've been talking to Fidel at the grocery store. But and I'm getting better. I know I'm getting better because we used to just do a little hablar in Spanish, which is just to talk. Now we're doing charlar. We actually gossip and talk about things. Who was it who said, if you don't have anything good to say about somebody, come sit next to me? That was Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, Alice Longstreet Roosevelt. So I've been following those principles. Anyway, I'm getting better because when he talks to me, it's a little faster. He uses more idiomatic language, and we do this charlar and not just hablar. And occasionally, I don't speak Spanish very much in my day-to-day life. I run into a friend who's a Mexican-American. Last time I did that, I spoke Spanish to her for the change. She said, Steve, your Spanish is so much better. What have you been doing? Well, it's not from talking to Fidel. I can only talk to Fidel for at the most 1 minute because he has other customers, and 1 minute a week is not going to get you very far. Here's what is really happening. I go home and I've been reading. I've been following the advice of a colleague of mine, Benico Mason, and I'll tell you about her later. And I've been doing lots and lots of very easy reading. I've been reading graded readers, books especially made for people acquiring the language. And I've been doing this for more than the last year, about the last 1.5 years. That's what's responsible. I have not been studying Spanish grammar. I have not been doing hard reading where I have to look up all the words, okay? I have not been getting my errors corrected. Most of this, nearly all of it, comes from the reading. And the great thing about graded readers is that they're getting better. In fact, they're literature now. They're really interesting. And I'm going to talk about that a little more. So this is what's been happening. I have been acquiring Spanish from doing lots of easy reading, not from talking, not from getting corrected, just from reading. And librarians, it works, no question. You'll see it in the research, and I have my own personal experience. Now I'll do the boring part and repeat everything in academic language, so you'll have some respect for me. I'm going to do this in terms of hypotheses, what we know about language acquisition. The first hypothesis, called acquisition learning, we have 2 different ways of getting better in language. You can acquire language and you can learn language. They're very different. Acquisition, the synonym is picking up a language. I was in Quebec for a couple of weeks and I picked up some French. That really means you acquired it. Acquisition is subconscious. While it's happening, you don't know it's happening. You think you're having a conversation, reading a story. Of course you are. But at the same time, without realizing it, you are acquiring the language. Once you're finished acquiring, you're not always aware that anything has happened. It's in your brain subconsciously. You have a feeling that something is correct, but you don't necessarily know the rule. We are very good at language acquisition. I'm coming to the conclusion rapidly that we are born to acquire language. And guess what? We can do it our entire lives. The ability to pick up language does not go away. I got this friend, Steve Kaufman. He's a polyglot. He's really something. He knows about 20 languages, no kidding. And I have been with him when I've heard him use 3 of them. He's really good. Anyway, he knows 20 languages. He has done 6 of them since age 62. That is really encouraging. It never turns off. So this is language acquisition. This is what the brain does very, very well. The other way we can get better in language, this is a tougher path to follow, is called learning. This is conscious knowledge of language. This is what we did in school. When we talk about rules, when we talk about grammar, we're talking about learning, not acquisition. When we are corrected, this is supposed to help our learning. You make a mistake, someone corrects you, you change your idea of what the rule is. So the 6-year-old, let's say limited proficient child, comes to school and says, I comes to school every day. Teacher says, no, it's I come to school every day. The child is supposed to think, oh yeah, that S doesn't go on the first person singular, it goes on the third person singular. That's supposed to be what happens. In reality, it doesn't work very well. Its error correction has not been terribly successful. Occasionally, yes, but not very often. We are very poor at language learning. This is the big mistake we have discovered. We have focused our efforts on language learning, and we're not very good at it. The next hypothesis kept me very busy in the 1980s, and it's called the natural order hypothesis. And it says we acquire language, not learn it, in a predictable order. Some things come early, some in the middle, some come late. For example, in English, the progressive tense, John is playing the violin, that comes early. It's one of the first grammatical rules to be acquired. The third person singular we just talked about comes later, okay? In first language, there might be 6 months to a year between those two structures. For second language, in adults, the third person singular may never come. We all know, I think, people who speak English as a second language pretty well, but they make occasional mistakes on the third person singular. Interesting. I want to share with you some, I think, amazing facts, lots of amazing facts today. Some amazing facts about the natural order. Number one, you can't change it. You can drill the third person singular all day long, but just like good wine, it will not be ready till its time has come. All the drill, all the exercises, it takes time, okay? We can't force it. I'll tell you my stories, which are the same as yours. I think when I was, my version of it, when I was a professor of linguistics many years ago at USC, the professor in the office next to mine, we became pretty good friends. His name was Masayoshi Shibatani, and his specialty was Japanese grammar, Japanese syntax. Matt spoke English quite well. When he wrote English, absolutely perfect. When we had casual conversations, he would occasionally drop the third person singular. Isn't this something? Here's a guy with a PhD in linguistics. Matt Shibatani knew more about English grammar than anyone in Southern California. When I had a problem in English grammar, I went to him. He always knew the rule, knew the answer, et cetera. And he occasionally made mistakes on the third person singular, a rule he had known since he was 10 years old. So knowing the rule is not the prerequisite. You cannot change the order. The natural order doesn't go from easy to hard, simple to complicated. We used to think it did. In fact, when we make syllabi in ESL and in foreign language, we start with easy rules, but that's not the order in the acquirer's brain. Wow. It is not the syllabus. I thought it was one of many mistakes I made. It is not the syllabus. It's the result of doing language acquisition. Okay, let's go on to grammar. It's called the monitor hypothesis on the overhead. This says that language that you consciously learn, I'm not against teaching grammar. I would never say, teaching grammar is evil. Teach grammar, go to jail. I would never say that. It's just hard to do and hard to learn. There are very powerful constraints that prevent us from using grammar. If you want to use grammar, first of all, the way we use it is we use it as an editor. If you're saying something in another language and you realize you're about to make a mistake, before you speak, sometimes you kind of examine the rule and you make corrections and then you say it. This is called monitoring or editing. This is what it's used for, or we do it when we're writing. It's kind of hard to use, all right? First of all, it can get in the way. What I used to do is I used to plan my sentence while the other person was talking, and then I'd come out with a brilliant, beautiful sentence, and it made no sense because the person was talking about something else. I wasn't listening. So it's kind of a dangerous strategy to use. So you've got to know the rule, though, if you're going to do this. And we don't know all the rules. That's a huge constraint. We have, even the best linguists in the world have described only fragments of the best described language of English. We don't know all the rules. We know a short part. Linguists are constantly coming up with better and better descriptions. So we don't know all the grammar books don't have all the rules. The best teachers don't know all the rules. So this is already a limit. So that's number one. Number two, if you want to use grammar while you're speaking or writing, you've got to be thinking about grammar. You've got to be thinking about correctness. We call this focus on form. This is nearly impossible to do in a conversation. It's kind of like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time. Very, very hard to do. In fact, it's unnatural. Number three, if you want to monitor your language, put in the rule, change things, it takes time. In normal conversation, we generally don't have time for this. The only time these conditions are met, when you know the rule, you're thinking about grammar, and you got time, is when you take a grammar test. You have studied the rule, you're thinking about being right, and you have time to change it around. The rest of the time, we don't use grammar. We hardly use it at all. In fact, in our studies back in the 80s, we found that even when we gave people on time, we told them to give them lots of time, here's a test, they still weren't very good at applying the grammar rules that they studied. Okay, now we come to the big moment. If this isn't true, if it's not about grammar, and we're gradually moving toward reading in libraries, how do we acquire language? How does it happen? I'd like to illustrate this. Daniela, can people see me on the screen? I hope you can. So even if you can, okay. I'm going to give. I'm going to
for some time.
It's okay.
And
Oh, we cannot. Okay, I'll do my best here.
We can't.
Okay, see if you can put me on the screen. That would be fun, just for a little while.
You have to turn on your camera. Do you want me to just put your picture up there?
We'll do that. I will start my video. Okay, I just did that. There we go. This is how I look in the morning. Oh my. I'm going to give you two lessons, and you can tell me which one you like better. It's a language lesson in a language you've probably heard before. Maybe some of you have studied, and you can tell me which of the two lessons is better. Here's lesson number one. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte Ihnen voraussagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? I don't think so. How about if I repeated it? Would that help? No. How about if I slowed it down? Actually, that was pretty slow, as you'll see later. How about if I said it and you repeated it back? No, that wouldn't help. None of those things matter, and you can see that now. Here's lesson number two. Please watch me on the screen for a moment, okay? Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie das? Kopf? Ja, gut. Hier sind meine Augen. Meine Augen. Ich habe zwei Augen. Eins, zwei. Eins, zwei. Zwei Augen. Und hier sind meine Brillen. Ja, guten Morgen. Und hier sind meine Ohren. Ich habe zwei Ohren. Eins, zwei. Und hier sind meine Zigaretten. Meine Zigaretten. Ach nein, ich habe keine Zigaretten. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number two, I did everything necessary to teach you German. I'm now going to share with you the most important finding we have had about language acquisition. We acquire language in one way and only one way: when we understand it. That's it. We acquire language when we understand what people tell us or what they say. If you understood a little bit, not every word, a little bit of the second German lesson, I did everything necessary to teach you German. That's it. You got the whole thing, okay? We acquire language by input. The ability to speak, the ability to write is the result of language acquisition, not the cause. We have confused cause and effect in language acquisition, and we're trying to repair that now. The ability to speak, the result of language acquisition, we got to be a little careful. That doesn't mean we should start talking right away. We have to listen, lots of listening or lots of reading, and then we can gradually start using the language. In fact, early speech, having to talk right away, not only is useless, but it's very uncomfortable. Time for another story. And one of the heroes of this story is my daughter, our daughter, this was about, this was 54 years ago. Oh my goodness. She was down the street, a couple of houses down, playing with a friend of hers, at neighbors of ours who were very good friends of ours. You got to know that, it's part of the story. And my job was to go over and pick up both girls and bring them to our house, because the mom had to go to her Spanish class. She was taking Spanish at Santa Monica Community College at the time. So I went over and I said, okay, girls, let's go. We're all going to my house. We'll have a great time. And my neighbor then said, I'm not quite ready to leave. Can we wait a minute? I have to go in the kitchen and take my pill. So she goes into the kitchen, takes a pill, drinks some water. And again, we were quite good family friends. And I said, what was that about? She said, that was Valium. Today we would take Prozac, anxiety reducing medication. And again, I could be a little bit personal. I said, why are you taking Valium? She said, it's Spanish class. It makes me so nervous. What she actually said is, Spanish class freaks me out. And ever the researcher then even, I said, what is it about Spanish class that makes you so nervous when the teacher calls on me and I have to say something in class? When I got home, I looked at all the research on anxiety in beginning language teaching. Speaking was at the top. Forced speaking when you feel you're not quite ready, when you have to use stuff that you've learned, but you haven't acquired, okay? Wow, and I found a number of quotes from other scholars that says exactly the same thing. I wrote a paper about this called Down with Forced Speech, called this Forced Speech, and I want to give you a little bit more of the data. There's an anthropologist named Sorensen who did a wonderful study in South America, in the Valpes River area. In this small area, there are 10,000 people who speak 24 different languages. Can you imagine that? 10,000 people is not a lot of people. If you go to a football game, there are only 10,000 people in the stadium. That doesn't look very good. It's not very many. They had a funny rule in this culture. Oh, by the way, 10,000 people, 24 different languages, lots of languages. And they had this rule: you can't marry anyone who speaks your first language. So my wife and I both broke the rules. And, we both speak English as a first language, but we're getting along very well anyway. And children growing up in that group had to acquire mommy's language, daddy's language, what they call the lingua franca of the local group, okay? And all the other languages. And they were constantly acquiring languages their whole lives. Sorensen interviewed them. Very good idea. How did they do it? Here's what he said. Well, they don't start speaking the languages right away. they listen. He says they don't practice speaking the language they don't know well yet. They may make an occasional attempt to speak a new language, but if it doesn't come easily, they don't try to force it. Wow. Eugene Nida comes up with similar conclusions. He was one of my heroes when I was studying language teaching back in the old days. He discussed a group in Africa who would go to neighboring tribes and work with the other tribe people, okay, and work side by side with them, and how they picked up the language, almost without exception, okay? They, when working with these other people, instead of trying hard to learn the language, underline that, instead of trying hard, they just seemed to take it for granted. After listening to the language long enough, they would find they could hear it. That means understand it. We live there and listen. Before we know it, we can hear what they say. Same idea. Now, for all of these groups that pick up languages naturally through listening, took a while. And I've compared that to informal language acquisition, successful. It takes a year or two until they really start speaking it, et cetera. They go through a long silent period, okay? Here's the good news, ladies and gentlemen. We can do a lot better. We have language classes. Isn't that great? And good books in our libraries. You'll find I'm going to talk a lot about that. In good language classes, you can get comprehensible input from the first day. We do a lot better than simply going out in the environment because people are starting to teach it using, I think, the right neighbors, the right way of doing it. Okay, now that I've told you a little bit about how it happens, let me talk a little bit about comprehensible input. What are some of the characteristics? Number one, we just discovered this, kind of embarrassing. The input has to be interesting, all right? We've been violating this for decades. Language classes are so boring, my goodness. I took French in high school. This is true confession time. Today, I speak French pretty much okay, all right? It's one of my better languages. When I took French in high school, it was all grammar. Teacher was a really nice guy, but he had no idea. Nobody did in those days. The teacher had a conference with me after 2 years, and he said, I'm going to give you a passing grade, but you don't deserve it. I'm going to pass you only because if I fail you, it's going to spoil your record. You'll never get into college. And the rest of your classes are pretty much okay, the rest of your grades. He saved me. So the class was absolutely terrible. So were most classes, not very interesting. We have discovered that the input has to be interesting so people will pay attention to it. Some of you realize I'm coming close toward beginning to talk about reading. Of course, it's got to be not just interesting. I like the word compelling. So interesting that you forget that you're listening to or reading another language. Only the story counts, only the message. So it's got to be interesting, and we violate that all the time. The times are changing. Number 2, 3, whatever. Language acquisition doesn't happen all at once. We have assumed that it happens all at once. You give students a list of vocabulary words, you expect them to know them after a few exercises and get them right on a quiz at the end of the week. No, it's gradual, it's a little at a time. Researchers at the University of Illinois, wonderful group. I like their work so much. I learned so much from them. The research is in first language, and we have replicated it in second language. They have found if you are listening to or reading a language that you're not totally familiar with, and you come to a word that's new to you, and you, thanks to the context, you begin to understand it, that's how it happens. Each time you encounter a new word or grammatical rule in context and you understand it, not perfectly, but even a little, you get a little bit of it. You gradually acquire it. As you hear it and see it over and over again, gradually it settles in. And we have seen this is true in second language. If this weren't true, people would never acquire language. You guys I'm talking to a well-read group, a very literate group, librarians. It's so wonderful. Your English vocabulary is like at least 50,000 words, probably 150,000. Add to that other languages you may know. That's not 50,000 trips to the dictionary. That's not, this is your first language. That's not 50,000 flashcards. You've picked it up a little at a time, subconsciously through context. Now, people have disagreed with me, of course, this is every day, all day long. And they've said, well, no, it can't be that way. It can't be that way because context is not always correct. And they love this example. Again, take a look at me at the overhead. You see this picture, a finger pointing. Now, and you hear something. What does that mean? Does it mean finger? Does it mean hand? Does it mean over there? Does it mean like, okay? What does it mean? Well, it gives you a little bit of the meaning, not quite. As you see more context, as you see it, you gradually acquire the meaning of the word. Again, this is what we have replicated. We have seen it again and again. Otherwise, people would never acquire language. There are too many words, too many grammatical rules, but nevertheless, we managed to do it. Okay, let's now go to application. And in terms of application, I want to start some new terminology. And the terminology, I want to introduce a new word. And I want to give you the secret of success. How would you like to be a famous presenter like me and get invited by Daniela Smith to come to these big conferences and give the keynote? I'll tell you the secret. Invent new terminology. This is great. And try it, and then people will think it was your idea, no matter what, you get to be famous for it. And make sure when you invent new terminology, it's not completely clear. People don't quite understand what you mean, and they'll think you're a lot smarter than they are. And I've got a new term that absolutely works. I'll tell you what it is, and you'll say, what does that mean? Okay, and then I'll explain it. The word is conduit. I call this the conduit hypothesis. The conduit is passageway, moving from one place to another. I think language acquisition, in terms of the real world, works in terms of conduit. One stage leads to another stage, leads to another stage. That's the conduit hypothesis. The first in all the stages have something powerful in common. And to present this, I want to tell you another story, okay? And we're getting really close to our main point now. I live about 30 miles from city of Los Angeles. When I drive there on Pacific Coast Highway, you run into Santa Monica, then Venice. And before the pandemic, I drove there twice a week, which is like, round trips twice a week. Really boring, I'll tell you about that. And then I would get to Santa Monica, and I could stop at the Santa Monica Library and visit my daughter. My daughter's a public librarian, yes, okay. And then I would get to Venice Beach, where I could meet Arnold Schwarzenegger, which I met him once on the beach, and pump iron, you could tell, right? And what do you do in the car for 30 minutes twice in one day? Well, first thing I did was listen to the radio, and even then it was Donald Trump. I got tired of that. So I started listening to music, and you'd think I'd be interested in music. My undergraduate degree was music education, music history. They got me started. But here's what they did, the radio stations. They took all the good music and they put it on pay to listen stations. So if you want to hear the classics, Beethoven, Chopin, the Bee Gees, the Beatles, these are the classics for me. You got to pay for these stations, which I think is outrageous. So I stopped that. So what do you do in the car? I started listening to stories. I stopped at the library. I'm a member of two local libraries. One of them is the Santa Monica Library. I told you so I could see my daughter. And I started taking books on tape, CDs, etc. Now which really worked, but that was wonderful. I got to listen to great stuff in the car. It was never boring. The problem though, for me, I'm like a college professor, right? I should be listening to classic literature, but they didn't have any, and they only had English. So I started listening to, yes, Danielle, audiobooks, absolutely. Bestsellers, that's what they had. Popular fiction. To my amazement, they're pretty good. Some are excellent. People who write popular fiction, I think many of them are absolutely brilliant. I started, of course, with Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling, my goodness, I listened to all 7 of the Harry Potters. I got very inspired and interested what Harry Potter's for us. It was written for educators. The hero, Dumbledore, is the headmaster of the school, and he has a central role in all these things. And the stories are all about Harry and Hermione and Ron and their adventures in their classes, some good, some bad. J.K. Rowling had wonderful insights on education. The books were so good that I did what you do, and I still do. When I got home, I would stay in the car to hear the end of the chapter, right? Because you want to know what's going to happen next, okay? So this really worked. From Harry Potter, I went on to Hunger Games, which I thought was marvelous. I thought it was all about education. You give some schools all the money and others get none, okay? Some districts. So I think that's ridiculous. Everybody should get their fare, shouldn't have to beg for it. And I went on to popular literature. John Grisham, I don't care about medical stuff, but his stuff or legal stuff, but it was so good. I read medical novels, mystery novels, still doing it. It's terrific. I got a huge respect for everyday popular fiction. The conduit hypothesis is, I think, one great way of applying it is, I'll give you 3 words that mean the same thing. Fiction, everyday popular fiction, novels, lots of it, stories, they all mean, and literature, they all mean the same thing. The first stage in applying the conduit hypothesis, as you know for sure, is stories. The first language research on stories is really impressive. This is Gordon Wells' big study, has been replicated many times. Mommy and daddies out there, you know all about this. Kids love to hear stories. Something like 90% of children say they like it when mommy and daddy read them stories, of course. The 10% who don't like it, mommy and daddy are not interested in telling stories. Wow, is that weird? Anyway, because I just love it, and so do most of you. What do we know about that? Kids like to hear it, and they profit from it. The more stories you hear, the kids who hear lots of stories in school and at home are better in reading. They read earlier, they have more knowledge, everything works on this pleasant, very pleasant activities. This has been, oh, by the way, personal note, I read stories to my kids all the way through high school. My goodness, and of course to their kids too, and I'll read to their kids, all right? My daughter is a little older than my son, so when she went off to college, I read just to my son. And we had such a good time reading and we talk about these stories to this day. And in case you think this is a case of arrested development, you're still reading stories to him and he's 18 years old. He's now a college professor, all right, of mathematics. That's why I don't like people calling me Dr. Krashen, because he's the real one, no question, okay? So this story stuff works with different people, different ages. I just finished a working paper, submitted to publication yesterday, about some research, what happens when you take adults who have what are called cognitive decline, adults in their 60s and 70s, and you start reading stories. You see a little bit of improvement over time in comprehension, etc. Okay, so we may have something there. It may be for use of all ages. Who knows? We all like doing it. Okay, let's talk about application. The application is from my colleague, Beniko Mason. She has developed a method called story listening. One of many methods of doing this. I think this is the best one. She selects stories that are, in her terms, have stood the test of time. Grimm's fairy tales. She developed this telling stories to beginning and low intermediate students in a local university near where she lives, where she teaches in Japan. So these were students in Japan with English as a foreign language. She goes through the stories before she presents them, picks the parts that she thinks will be a little bit difficult, and makes what she calls a prompter. She's prepared to give a little more context. She'll draw pictures. She's very good at drawing this stuff. She'll do more paraphrasing. If necessary, occasionally she might do a quick translation into Japanese. What has she found? Really impressive results. She does not tell the students, pay attention to this new vocabulary. She says, just try to understand. That's why I'm explaining the words. You don't have to write them down, make flashcards. She then, several weeks later, occasionally gives them a surprise test on the vocabulary, just for our purposes. Guess what? They acquire a fair number of words. They're better off using that time to hear more stories than doing drills and exercises. We tried this. We tried telling a story, taking those words and give them a few, draw a line from the word to the definition, write 3 sentences with every word, etc. Get a little bit of growth, not much. You're better off listening to another story. Big conclusion. Beginning language teaching is story time. That's what it is. Can you imagine you go to ESL or French class and you hear some nice stories? That's class. You don't do it once for one story. You do it 2-3 semesters. So they hear hundreds of excellent stories, and we see much better performance than we ever did. Well, stories, the story session time is the warm-up for the next stage in the conduit, and that is actual reading. Dr. Mason has developed a method called guided self-selected reading. This is largely for adult students through graded readers, which I've been doing in Spanish, which has been, as I told you before, extremely interesting. I did it last night, etc. And here's what happens. The students, after a while, are ready to start reading. The first day of class, the teacher comes to school with a pile of graded readers, lots of very, very interesting ones, okay? My favorite author, Adriano Ramirez, has a bunch of very interesting ones, extremely easy, extremely comprehensible. Anyway, she spreads them out on the table and the students pick the ones they want to read. It's self-selected. This is magic. Self-selected reading is, no question, the way to go, okay? They pick it up. If it's not comprehensible, they put it down again. They look something else. They start reading it. If it's not interesting, you put it down and you can, go on to something else. It's up to you. This assures that it's going to be compelling if it's what you select. We'll talk more about this, okay? Here's our research. We had a couple of students in Dr. Mason's class who wanted to see how well they were doing. They took alternate forms of the best known test in English. It's a foreign language, that's the TOEIC test. And they paid for itself. It's like $10 to take an alternate form. And we got their scores. Here's what we found, amazing results. The TOEIC is from 0 to 1,000. If you hit 250, you're ready to start reading. For every hour you spend reading in class, you gain 0.6 of a point on the TOEIC. You total that up, you do 2 hours a day of pleasure reading over a couple of years, you go from 0 to 60, folks. You go all the way. You're ready to even start academic reading. 2 hours a day of having a good time reading for fun, which a lot of us do all the time. We're addicted to it. It really works, really, really works. You can get kids just about up to the 700s, 800s on this test. This is our prediction anyway, for what we found. I want to show you some other research. There's more to it. One of my favorite studies is, again, I'm pushing my former students, or at least thanking them for their efforts. Fei Shen, who's now a college professor at California State University, Long Beach, did this study with one of the other faculty members. The child's name was Sophia. So of course we called our study Sophia's Choice, and you can find it on the list of references. Sophia had been limited English, but became fluent in English, first language Mandarin. And the school she went to had an interesting practice. They would give students a reading comprehension test in the fall. So if you look at me, here's the fall. Then they would give them another reading comprehension test in the spring. They would expect the students to get better. Not with Sophia. She got worse. Her fall score was up here. Her spring score was down there. Then after the summer, she would come back to school, take the test. Her score was higher than it was the year before. She made up what she lost and got better. Okay, librarians, what do you think happened over the summer? She went to the local public library. And you know what she read? Sweet Valley High, okay? She read all the stuff that kids like to read, okay? That's how she got better. She read for fun. She averaged about 50 books over the summer. Her mom was a faculty member and said, you know, my daughter isn't doing very well at school. Yeah, I think I should teach her, keep her home, let her go to the library. She'd make much, much better gains, okay? So this really, really worked. Sophia's Choice. Another paper by DeVries I'd like to tell you about, one of my favorite, because it's only 2 pages long, which I love. You got to write short papers, I think. Here's what DeVries found. He did a very short paper. He looked at language arts classes that he taught and divided the kids into 2 groups, 5th graders, English as a first language. One group, 2 themes a week, the standard stuff. The other group, no writing, all reading and reading for pleasure, increase amount of reading. Who did better on the final writing test? The reading class. Wow. C and Lee, the next one, former dean at her college at Taiwan, my former student, she's done very well. Anyway, EFL class in Taiwan with the older students, adult students. And they gave them a writing test at the end of the year. The ones who read more for pleasure in English did better. The ones who wrote more in class didn't do better. There's a number of casual cases like this of the outside world case histories. Extremely convincing one, I think, is Malcolm X. And this is in his autobiography. As you know, Malcolm X was a brilliant speaker and writer. And he says in his autobiography, those who've heard me speak, read what I've written, will think I went to school far beyond the 8th grade. Not so. The story of Malcolm X, he started hanging out with the wrong kids as a teenager, got into trouble, was arrested in his early 20s, went to prison. Someone, he said, called him, a British newspaper, and said, what was your alma mater? He said, books. He discovered the prison library. He says, at night when the guards would come to make sure you're in your bunk, he was under the covers reading. He read everything and everything. He said, you couldn't have gotten me out of books with a wedge. Story after story is like this. These are typical cases. What comes out in all these cases is the power of fiction. Oh my goodness. It's fiction that makes it happen. Librarians, you know, the history of libraries and controversies, the last 100 years, the last century, there was a big movement against fiction. Librarians would brag and say, we have very little fiction in our library. It's all nonfiction. And then we had seduction of the innocent, the attack on comic books, and said, you know, this leads kids into lives of crime and was bad for their literacy. Turns out none of that was true. We've fully recovered from all this stuff. It turns out fiction turns out to be the winner. There's a research institute in London, in the Center for Longitudinal Studies, in which these researchers have looked at people over long periods of time. They started with one group when they were kids, 3, 4 years old, did, innocent studies with them, non-toxic studies, talked to the parents. And the last one they did was when the same people were 41 years old. I don't know how old the researchers were. People were 41. They asked them what they read, native speakers of English, gave them questionnaires. The big winner, fiction. Middle-brow fiction was by far the best predictor, more than nonfiction. Now we go to the research of someone I'm very happy to quote all the time because he's so brilliant. Jeff McQuillan was actually my student. Remember the line in Star Wars where I think Obi-Wan or Darth Vader says it, you were the teacher and I was the student. Now I am the teacher and you are the student. That's me and Jeff McQuillan. I was the master, he was the student. No question, he is the master. Here's a couple of studies by Jeff McQuillan that'll show you that. Jeff, in these open access journals, reading in a foreign language, analyzed the language in all 7 Harry Potter novels, which you can do by computers, and pulled out an analysis of how many academic words there were and how many academic words were there that came up over and over again, so you had a good chance of acquiring them. His conclusion, if you read the 7 Harry Potter volumes, you will acquire about 200 academic words that are on the recommended list of academic words that students should know. He did another study, same thing, where he looked at 22 novels that young people read. Twilight, Nancy Drew. By the way, I have to confess, I never got into Twilight. Nancy Drew, I understand. Nancy Drew is good writing, in my opinion. You really want to know what's going to happen next, et cetera. Twilight, I just couldn't handle it. My daughter said, go on to the next one, it gets better. But, I actually, maybe someday I'll try again. Anyway, those books, he had a list of 22 books that kids like to read, adolescents. He predicted that you would pick up a huge amount, about 40% of the academic words that you need in school. And doing those words by formal instruction is very painful and very hard to do. So it's through these books that kids are picking up academics. One that I take personally, Rolls and Rogers, Jeff McQuillan pointed this one out to me. 1 million words of reading science fiction, it's about a year's worth of reading, gives you nearly all of the scientific vocabulary you need for all of science. I've wondered about that because I don't read a lot of stuff from scientific journals. In literacy, I do, yes. Occasionally the brain studies that have to do with literacy, but I don't read about studies of the liver or stuff like that. And I always get interested in diseases that my friends and relatives have. So I look them up and I read some of them. And you know what? I can understand them fairly well. Science fiction, folks, because I have the basic scientific vocabulary. So this is point number 1 about fiction. And folks, this gets better and better. We are reaching some astonishing hypotheses. So give me a few more minutes. I have shown you so far that if you do lots of reading of fiction, you will pick up a lot of you pick up a lot of language. You get grammar, you get vocabulary, your writing improves. Most of that comes from fiction, in my opinion. Now, just from seeing it in print and understanding it little by little. Number 2, people who read more know more, and what they read is fiction. The best study of this I have ever read. As soon as I read it, I contacted Jeff. I said, have you seen this? He says, yes. Isn't it wonderful? Stanovich and Cunningham, 1993. They looked at college students, English speakers, and gave them tests. I would say these are good tests of what people should know when they graduate high school. Is what we'd like them to know. Science, for example, what part of the body does pneumonia occur in, the lungs, all that. Who is Linus Pauling? Who is Isaac Newton? Are you familiar with these words? So it's tests of science, tests of history, social studies. Where is the Panama Canal? Tests of current events, daily living technology, which is what we need all the time. Multicultural literacy. Who was Bertrand Russell? This kind of stuff. They gave them these tests. And they gave them other tests to see what the predictors were. I'll tell you what was the best predictor. You better sit down when I tell you that. How much popular reading they had done. Their, what they call print exposure, their familiarity with popular novelists' names and top movies, not television. That didn't work. The conclusion to that is the amount of pleasure reading you did is what you need for a life that gives you the information you need from reading. I'm going to interrupt this by giving you one example from my life. About 20 years ago, I got drafted to be on jury duty, and I went. And because I was a college professor, they made me foreman. Boy, what a mistake. It was a child abuse case. It was very moving. And I was sure the guy was guilty. I did my analyses, pencil and paper, charts. And the judge let us know subtly that if you find this guy guilty, we're not just going to throw him in jail. We're going to get him some therapy. We're going to get him some help. Okay. And I was convinced he was guilty, no question. So were 10 out of the other 11 jurists. One person on the jury took pity on him. No, we should have done that. And the jury was hung. She said, no, not guilty. I'm not convinced. So they had to do the trial all over again. I hope they found him guilty. If I had read The Runaway Jury, the novel, I would not have made that mistake. I would have realized the power I had as foreman of the jury, that I could have talked to the judge. I could have gotten that jurist replaced and had a new trial. It would have saved the taxpayers huge amount of money, time, and justice would have been served. It was from a novel where I understood what goes on in juries, what you can do, what you can do. Very important, very powerful. So reading popular fiction is a good predictor of general knowledge. Grades are not. Kids with better grades did not do much better on these tests, just a little bit. This is the Hermione factor, okay? With students like Hermione with their hand up all the time, et cetera, do they do better? Not necessarily. They learn more? No. Tests of intelligence? Not much of a predictor. Math, not much of a predictor. The big predictor, how familiar we were with popular fiction and good movies. Homework is not the answer. It's reading for pleasure. My hero there is someone you know very well, and that's Alfie Kohn, K-O-H-N. One of his many masterful contributions is a book called The Homework Myth. His conclusions in a nutshell: the amount of homework you do in school does not predict anything in elementary school. And in high school, the prediction is very, very tiny, but it disappears when you do statistics correctly, okay? And if you think that homework builds character and discipline, study habits, Alfie Kohn find no study has ever shown that. Look, guys, if kids spent that time reading for pleasure, the world would be better off and we'd have so much more fun in life, because that's where our knowledge comes from. We're not done. There's more. This gets even better. Can you see why I'm so enthusiastic about presenting this stuff? This is win-win-win. Even if we do a little more pleasure reading and a little less homework, what a change. Third, people who read more have better developed habits of mind. They have more empathy. People have pointed out when you read a lot of fiction, you're in the mind of someone else. You get to know how they think, why they make the decisions they make. Noam Chomsky, you may have heard of, said, it is quite likely we will find out more about human nature by reading novels than scientific psychology. This is Noam Chomsky. Can you imagine? The Guardian, London newspaper, interviewed a number of people and asked them about their reading habits. Fortunately, they interviewed Barack Obama. You can guess what he said. Barack Obama, erudite, former college professor, okay? My goodness, when he was in the Senate, they called him No Drama Obama because he was so steady, so even, knew his stuff, et cetera. Here's what he said, and I got to emphasize, President Obama did not read the same stuff, the research that I have. This is conclusions he has come to. Here's what he says: when I think about how I understand my role as citizen, the important stuff I've learned from novels. It has to do with empathy. It has to do with being comfortable with the notion that the world is complicated and full of grays, but there's still truth to be found. It's possible to connect with someone even though they're very different from you. All right, it's time for me to name drop again. I haven't done enough of it, okay? I don't have a personal relationship with Barack Obama, but my son met him. Can you imagine that? I got to tell you his impression. Danny won an award along with 100 other kids when he was just starting college, and they got to meet the president, a Young Scholars Award. And the whole family went. We went to this ceremony. The whole thing was amazing. And I asked Danny, what was it like? And contrast this with meeting some other former presidents, okay? He says, when you're with Barack Obama, he looks you right in the eye. He's there with you. Other people don't exist. He listens. Oh, thanks, Jennifer Sawyer. You got the same impression. He's very nice, no question. He's with you. He shakes your hand and he listens to what you're saying and he responds appropriately. That is really something, okay? Not Donald Trump. I got to tell you about Donald Trump. I take great effort in criticizing Donald Trump. I'll tell you why. I learned this from Theodore Roosevelt, former president, who said, it is the citizen's responsibility to criticize the president. You're supposed to do this. If you should and you fail to do it, that is treasonous. So I feel this is my responsibility. I got a letter published in the Washington Post several years ago. The president at the time, I have trouble even saying his name. Oh gosh, it's like my daughter said he was the Antichrist. I think it's pretty close. Anyway, Trump had been talking about, people have been criticizing Trump's spelling in the Washington Post, saying this is terrible, this is terrible. We shouldn't criticize his spelling. He's our commander-in-chief, not our speller-in-chief. I wrote a letter which they published, and I said it's important to criticize his spelling. Spelling comes from reading. People who read more spell better. Trump is not only bad at spelling, he's bad at everything that comes out from reading. And I went through the research. I said he's bad at grammar. He's bad at writing. He doesn't know much. He mistakes who the leaders are in foreign countries, etc. He gets basic facts wrong. Total lack of empathy, as we all know. And the fact that, and Trump has bragged that he's not a reader, this has hurt all of us. And they actually published the letter. So in doing this, I think I was exercising my responsibility as a patriotic citizen. Okay, getting close to conclusions. If this is true, access to books is everything. This is when I discovered the work of Keith Curry Lance. If you don't know his work, just look at it, Lance. I think Keith Curry Lance deserves a Nobel Prize. Yes, our hero, no question. He and I are going to have a little conversation tomorrow. I just love talking to him. My gosh, he has done so well. Keith Lance worked for the Department of Colorado, Education Department in Colorado. And his task was, he was given this question, is literacy a problem we should throw money at? His answer, yes, but we have to aim carefully. And he has been publishing research on libraries, the impact of school libraries and some on public libraries for the last decade or so, and has put it up there. It has, in my opinion, it has not been cited enough. In fact, even among librarians, we have not done a good job in emphasizing this work, okay? It is a good deed. In my heritage language, we call this a mitzvah, a good deed, that we quote this work and get it around. The better the school library, that is in number of books, and the employment of a qualified, certified school librarian. That's a good library, according to Dr. Lance and Deborah Kochel, his colleague. And they have published this in the regular school library journal, et cetera. The better the reading scores. Lance, with another colleague, the better the local public library. The more books read, the better the reading scores in the local school, in the district. So good collections, credentialed librarians, leads to higher reading achievement. We must make, this comes first, we must have access. We must have access for everybody. In the beginning, I was saying children of poverty, this is their only chance they're going to get books. But the prices now are so unbelievably high. I can't afford books. You can't afford books. The library's there for absolutely everybody. It is the most important thing that we can do. Okay, I want to close with a comment on self-selection. Self-selection guarantees that books are going to be just right for the person getting them. The best evidence I know of for self-selection is what happened to me in high school, because it happened to you too. I went to high school in Illinois, all in English, Chicago area, as you know. And in high school, we had language arts. So 1 year was English literature, 1 year British literature. Like you, I read all the assigned reading. Like you, I took tests and I passed the tests. I don't remember a single book that I read in high school and took tests on. Not one, not a single author, nothing. Same with you guys, okay? But when I went home and I looked at the reading that I'd selected myself, my own reading habits, yes, I remember nearly all of them. I read science fiction. That was my main source of reading. Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, etc. I remember all of those. And you'll be surprised at this, I read baseball stories. I read the work of John R. Tunis. His first book, called The Kid from Tompkinsville, has been reviewed, and the reviewer says, this is the boy's book of Job. It's about having problems, overcoming them time after time. I'm still reading them. I'm rereading them. I'll tell you why. The medical center I go to here in Los Angeles is Kaiser Permanente. And my doctor, I'll tell you his name, Dr. Seymour Pearl. And when Dr. Pearl came, take care of me, he's a wonderful doctor. The nurses referred to him as patient-oriented. So you can see what Dr. Pearl is like as a doctor. He retired about a year and a half ago, and I ran into him at Kaiser. He had an appointment. And he said, Mr. Krashen, we should get together because I enjoyed our discussions. I said, good, call me Seymour. Okay, good. He liked the baseball stories. He liked John R. Tunis's baseball stories. So we got together. We're still doing it now on the web, on Zoom, and we talk about baseball stories. And we share them with other people and how they have changed our lives. I think about their story. I'll give you one example of many. It's from the Keystone Kids, the Dodgers, the mythical baseball team, the shortstop and the second baseman, both very young. Only a couple of years later, the owner of the team appoints the shortstop as the manager, which is very unusual. Player manager and so young. Kid was like 25 years old. In the book, and I'm going to send this to Daniela, okay? Maybe you can share it. They have a discussion. The manager gives a sermon to the players, and tells them about life and how you should behave. The best part of it, and again, those of you who understand baseball and don't will get it. Those who don't, I'll try to make it clear. When you hit the ball, you're batting, you hit a ground ball, and say the shortstop gets it, he throws it to first base, and it's got to get to first base before you do. Okay. He says, and you hit the ball and you're going to be out because the shortstop is fantastic and they never make mistakes. Run as hard as you can anyway. That one time in 1,000, the throw will be wild. The first baseman will drop it. And when you don't do it, you're going to be the villain. Okay. In other words, be impeccable. Even though you'll get no credit for all the times you ran. Be impeccable. At one time, you're going to have to do that. Dr. Pearl and I, Seymour, loved it because it was like his life as a doctor. You have a patient, it looks obvious. You're going to prescribe the medicine. Make sure you get it right. And make sure you talk to the patient about when they should be taking it. Well, he'll know, etc. That one time, it's going to be your fault. And you're going to have serious consequences. I have thought about that every day since reading that years ago. And that's what's in these novels. It's life, how to live, how to be a mensch, a human being. More evidence for self-selection. I'll give you just a little more, then I'll shut up. This is from Garrison Keillor, radio personality. This is about gift books. Gift books are assigned reading. You get a book from someone. He says, I get a book because I'm a former English major. I get gift books, Dickens, Thackeray, Smollett, Richardson, Emerson. None of them ever read by me, sitting on my shelf, looking down at me, making me feel guilty. I have the same shelf. I figured out what to do with it finally. I take the book and I get a little sticker, put it on it where the sticker is, to Steve, hope you like it. And I donate it to the local library because I'm not going to read it unless I have already tried to and I like it and it's something I need. Here's Donalyn Miller, okay, from Fort Worth, neighboring. No single practice inspires my students to read as much as the opportunity to choose their own books. No question. I do take recommendations for other people when it's professional reading. I take that very seriously. And there is one person, when he recommends something, I read it immediately. He knows me better than I do. And that's my son. He says, Dad, you might want to try this, okay? Bang. And my daughter, I take seriously what she's reading, etc. Okay, that is my message for today. We are ready now for the Q&A. And if you don't mind, Daniela, I'm going to ask the first question and answer it. And then we can go to everybody else's. And I hope we have some time. First question. You know, Dr. Krashen or Steve, whatever your name is, you really haven't done very well. You've been doing this for 45 years, comprehensible input, all that stuff. What has happened? Language is still taught the same boring ways. And you know, that's right. I got a catalog from, that name Santa Monica College again. And I looked at their language classes. They could have been taught in 1943. The same grammar, the same vocabulary, really hasn't done very well. I haven't gotten very far. So what are you going to do about it? Well, thank you for the comment. You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you what I think the reasons are and what can be done. Number one, the research responsive behind all this is buried. It's hard to find. It's in expensive books, textbooks, expensive journals that nobody can find. And if you can find it, you can't afford it. I can't. Nobody can anymore. Okay. What I've been doing and my colleagues have been doing, here's a new vocabulary word. It's called open access. Open access. I publish in journals that don't charge, that you can download for free. That's number one. So everything I write now in the last 5-6 years is open access. It makes things possible. In fact, the only research that counts now is open access because it's the only research anybody can find. Number two, it's written in what's usually written in what we call torturous prose. I can hardly understand these people. The articles are dense and they're much too long. Someone once said, when you ask someone the time, you don't want them to first give you a history of the wristwatch. That's what academics do. I can't get through this stuff. It's 10 pages until you know what they're talking about. So the articles I write now are short. Make it short, easy to find, comprehensible. This is the way, and it's going to take time till this gets around. Okay, so this is the problem. This is why people are not finding out about this, folks. We're doing our best. Okay, thanks for asking that one. Haha. On to the next question. Daniela, can you direct me to the next question somehow?
Well, there isn't a question in the chat at this time.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Because I can keep making them up.
We really appreciate you speaking with us here today. And we'll have to adjust our schedule and our lunchtime.
Okay, I got another thing to say then. If you let me interrupt you. If you want to read more of this stuff, I have also made many of my articles and books available for free. And I'll tell you where you can find them. Go to sdkrashen.com. sdkrashen.com. You can download them. My articles and several of my books are there. Don't ask my permission. Just do it, okay? You can share it with your friends, birthday parties, anything you want to do. This is a way, and my colleagues are doing that as well. Jeff McQuillan does it. He calls himself backseat linguist. Like I have a comment on what you're doing, etc. This, unfortunately, is the only way I know to get things around. I try to put them on Twitter. I mentioned that in the beginning. I am S. Krashen on Twitter, Krashen, and this is a wonderful way of sharing information. So check out Twitter. We can start to get these things around. Okay.
Todd had a question. Can you go ahead and unmute yourself, Todd, to ask your question?
Sure. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Krashen. So I am a pre-K2 dual language librarian. Pardon me. And I totally agree with the idea of free choice reading. Reading only became fun when I kind of got to choose it. It was a turn off otherwise.
I like you, Todd. Very good. Keep talking.
Well, my students, many of whom are first generation, many of them are struggling readers. Many of them are beginning readers. And with the exception of things like Pokemon and few various other things, they don't know about books. And our program is new, our library is new because of situations that we don't have time for. So how do you introduce books that kids will find interesting when they have attention spans of, look, squirrel?
Okay. Don't talk about Donald Trump that way. Okay, next, let me get at those by doing two topics I did not have time for. One is one of my passions, and that's comic books. A good study done in years ago, they put comic books in a high school library, did not allow them to circulate. Library traffic was doubled once the comics were there, and non-comic books taken out went up huge. This is one thing we have not exploited. Interesting, comprehensible comic books for beginning readers. But for beginning readers in general, in ESL, the big topic here is bilingual education. Let me give you a very quick look at bilingual education, which is one of our triumphs in the field of education, thanks to a guy named Jim Cummins from Canada, who published the initial research showing that kids who learn to read in their first language do very well learning to read in the second language. They correlate. We've done studies showing that's true. A lot of reading in the primary language is a wonderful, nearly guarantee that you're going to be okay. You get more background knowledge, which makes English more comprehensible. You get into reading, etc. So I would recommend bilingual education. In fact, I could go on for hours about this. I've done books in bilingual ed, literacy transfers, the pleasure of reading transfers. People are reluctant because no, they need English. This is the fastest route to English. So you want to see my take on this, go back to sdkrashen.com and look at the stuff on bilingual education. So easy reading. In general, comic books is one of the best. I think Stan Lee changed the world with Marvel Comics when they made superheroes with actual problems. Got very, very interesting. I think this too has become real literature. Problem is, comics can be challenging, not always for the beginning reader, etc. Okay, great questions. Any more? By the way, special comment, someone has made several comments about this. Jennifer, who's just commented about Marvel and DC and all that stuff. I'm going to make you so unbelievably jealous. I had lunch with Stan Lee about 20 years ago. and he invited me to lunch. I just want you to know Stan Lee is just the way you hope he is when you see all the cameos. Absolutely wonderful. And we talked about superheroes with problems. His favorite character, the Silver Surfer, who has more profound problems than anyone in literature anywhere. So what you think is true about Stan Lee and comic books is true. Hope that makes you feel good. Okay, next question. Going down the list. Oh, how do we? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So personally, I definitely my whole life have taken on the approach of popular reading and fiction. And so I'm not a big academic reader, but I do want to be able to speak to special educators, interventionists, district number crunchers who really can't get away from their thinking around the way to language development and literacy development is through drilling and boring nonfiction. So how can I quickly steer them away?
Lonnie, if I may call you Lonnie, too late now, I just did.
Yeah.
I wish the bean counters would spend more time counting beans. They haven't done it because the research is on our side. You'll pardon me, I'm going to use a dirty word, the science of reading. The science of reading, which is a heavy prophonics, prophonemic awareness group, has dominated, not by telling us about the research, by just by saying it louder and louder over and over again, and saying that people who don't like phonics are like people who are against vaccination. You're just anti-science, you don't understand. If you look at the research on phonics, we win over and over again, no question. Kids who get lots and lots of phonics, it only helps them pronounce words given in a list, doesn't help comprehension, all these things. You need to do real reading. So this is the problem. I would tell the bean counters, you want to tell us about the research? Tell us about the research. They never did. They just have their prejudices, their ideas that this is the way it's done. There are people who've been responding over and over again. I've been communicating with them steadily. They have done their best to destroy the work of Kenneth Goodman, of Frank Smith, people who put in years, who are this. We won in bilingual education this way because the studies were there and people eventually paid attention to them. We did meta-analyses, and bilingual just kept winning, kept winning, kept winning. And bilingual education has done quite well. We need to do the same thing with pleasure reading and the importance of libraries. Step number one, in my humble, not so humble opinion, cite Keith Lance as much as you can. Read his stuff. Tell all your friends. We've got to make sure we understand it. Step number one, quote Keith Lance a lot, refer people to his papers, which are very easy to read, and his work in statistics, in my opinion, is impeccable. Highly sympathetic with you. Okay. We have time for more?
And we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Let's take that last question from, I see someone had their hand up. I'm looking for her now. And she put her hand down. So one more question. Oh, Linda. Yes, Linda. What's your question?
Well, thank you for taking my question. I had a question about, we work with bilingual learners from all different cultural backgrounds, and sometimes we have students who are first generation, right? And they don't have quite of an anchor in their parents' L1.
Thank you for asking. Great, continue.
Right, and so I've been reading a lot about heritage language and some students and children who are feeling really frustrated at, not being proficient in their parents' L1 and are more, obviously, have transitioned more into the English side. So they're feeling lost, right? They're neither here nor there, so they can't really communicate with their grandparents, and they're losing their language. how do we best, how can we best support those learners or those students who are looking to make those?
Thank you, Linda. Linda, again, I've always liked you. This is the perfect question, okay? Support all your efforts. One of my major interests is heritage language. I had a big discussion with an Uber driver yesterday, going to pick up our stuff, and he speaks Spanish to his kids, and it's coming out fantastic. Here's what we see. The general pattern with kids who grow up with another language at home, they're fine for the first couple of years. They talk to mommy and daddy. They can talk to their abuelos. They can talk to their grandparents. Then English takes over from school, and you can hardly get a word out of them. Okay, and they can't speak the heritage language. And what's worse, they get criticized over and over by more fluent speakers. Oh, you would never know that you're the daughter of someone from Mexico. Your Spanish is so bad. Okay, so that is actually the main thing stopping heritage language. Not only that, there's nothing to read. My colleague Nushan Ashtari has done good studies on this. There's nothing in the local library in the heritage language. They get all this crap from people when they try to speak it. It's not in bookstores. It's not anywhere. And the classes in heritage language are very often traditional. And what Nushan has discovered, they say we feel pushed away from the heritage language. But Linda Habibi, we found the answer. The answer is reading fiction. We have a couple of studies. This is Lucy Say. And we have found that kids who read in the heritage language, Grace Cho has done a great study of this. If they read popular fiction, they get better. Make sure it's at least there in the library, including comic books. Make sure the library is full with interesting stuff to read. You won't have to sell it. It's so interesting, they'll want to read it. They need great stories going all the way to real popular fiction in the heritage language. So we're coming full circle. And the villain, which we are going to turn into the hero, is the public and school library. This is now going to, I hope, start stocking things in the heritage language, even in schools in Hispanic neighborhoods where they have bilingual programs. The holdings in Spanish are usually pretty dismal. We at least have to make sure it's there. So let's pump it up this way. Thank you so much for asking this question. This is a big one, and we can make life so much easier for so many people by doing this simple thing. Oh, I feel better. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Krashen, for answering all our questions and for enlightening us. That was a wonderful presentation. And I wish that we could spend more time talking about it. It's been amazing to hear from you. And everybody, now we know why he has his own Wikipedia page. He keeps saying that his son is the real Dr. Krashen, but it isn't.
No question. You don't know.
So thank you. I can't say thank you enough for enlightening us.
Okay,
So,
my pleasure. Just stay away from junk food and drink more coffee, okay?
okay. So,
Okay, Daniela, if we meet in person,
yes.
the first coffee's on you, okay?
Okay. I guess
Double
I
espresso.
owe you the first copy, right?
Okay.
I owe it to
And
you.
my nephew went to Denton, by the way. So I've been there and I've spoken. Had a great time.
I appreciate you coming to this humble gathering, and
Whole gathering, my
I hope
goodness.
that we can invite you back once we have the toolkit, which we're going to talk more about this afternoon. I know for many people in here, we spent time studying your work when we went to school. So like I said, this is a great honor to be here with you.
Okay, I haven't looked at the schedule today. I haven't looked at the program, but I'm going to stay tuned in on this channel and go see.
So I should talk about the schedule now. So you all, I did some breaks. Well, I did some changes. First and foremost, I don't want to talk too much. This is what will happen. And I'm just gonna fall on a sword on this one, forgive me. Now, at any time during the afternoon, if you have to get up and use the bathroom or whatever, please do feel free to do it. In the meantime, we were going to start our presentations at 11 o'clock, but I have shifted them. So as you can see here, now the presentations are going to start at 11:30. So you all can take a break until 11:30. There are rooms here that you will go to, and we have sponsors for each room who will record the conversation. Note that the first session is at 11:30 to 12. Some people may talk longer or shorter. There may be some discussion afterwards. Please monitor yourselves and stop at the appropriate time. Next up, the next presentation is going to be 12 o'clock to 12:30. I'm sorry, don't hate me for this, but I did adjust your lunch so that we can stay on the schedule. So lunch is 12:30 to 1 p.m. You may switch in between any of these rooms as needed. If you go to one session and you like it, but you want to hear from someone else, that is totally fine. But I do ask that you do go into your different rooms. I personally do not care if you come back in between and you are eating on something. That is fine with me. Don't be ashamed if you have to cut off your camera or something. I really appreciate you all doing this. Does anybody have any questions about the transitions in between? Please put it in the chat if you do. Also, please come back to this room at 1 o'clock p.m. So I hope you enjoy all of these presentations and you come back at 1. Please come back at 1. Okay, and here we have. Can the Zoom links be put in the chat, please? Okay, I can put the Google document into the chat. The Zoom links would be a little bit more difficult. I'll ask IJ to work on that for me though. There's the Google document with the agenda on it. And thank you, Todd. Todd is going to be one of our presenters. So breakout room 1. Let's see if this works out. Breakout room 2. And I'm also going to ask you all, humbly ask you all for an extra 15 minutes so that we can close this afternoon, sort of like till 3:40, and I will make it quick. I promise that I will after our next presentation. Lanny, you are absolutely welcome. I'm so excited about being able to do this work. I'm just humbled by everyone's willingness to be here. So I put all the breakout sessions in the chat, but you will find that, and IJ's being more specific, but you will find that I didn't list the presenters that are on the agenda. Okay, so it's 11:17, and then by 11:30, you can move on to one of those breakout sessions. And I'll be in this room, which is the main room. Breakout session 1 is actually me, and I'll be here in this main room. I'm going to get off the camera and stop talking until 11:30. Thank